What if I told you Super Mario 64 was never supposed to work? That everything about this game should have failed? A rushed development cycle? A brand new 3D world with no prior blueprint? A controller that barely made sense? By all logic, Super Mario 64 should have been a disaster. And yet, it became one of the greatest games of all time. How? If I told you, you wouldn't believe it, mama! See, Mario is a franchise that goes pretty damn far and wide, with lots of spin-offs ranging from the likes of horror, to racing, to whatever the this is.
Let's start off with Hotel Mario. All you do is run around and shut doors.
But before the release of Super Mario 64, not a lot of these Mario spin-offs existed. Heck, 3D games barely even existed. So that brings us to the first big problem with this game. Nobody on the development team knew what the they were doing. I mean, sure, in terms of 2D platformers, they had it all in the bag already. But this was 3D, and there wasn't really any blueprint on how a 3D platformer should work at the time. So this whole 3D Mario journey all started back in 1996. Tell me something I don't know. Okay, it all started back in 1993. Yahoo! During the production of 1993 Star Fox on the SNES, or SNES if you've got P's for brains, legendary game producer Shigeru Miyamoto conceived the idea of a 3D Mario game. I mean, it was only right. At the time, Star Fox was a game that utilized the meager computing prowess of the SNES in such a clever way that it was able to kind of simulate 3D graphics, kind of. With Mario being Miyamoto's love project as well as the company's biggest franchise till today, the idea of bringing Mario to a 3D space naturally occurred to him while working on Star Fox. Now, obviously, there were a number of issues with this. One being that the SNES simply wasn't powerful enough for that, and two being that Miyamoto wasn't God. But if there's one thing Gifted Hands by Ben Carson taught me, it's that when there's a will, there's a way, damn it. Also, not everyone can become a fucking medical doctor. Fuck you and your false dreams, Ben! So, they started developing it for the next generation Nintendo console instead. Now, the second big problem Team Miyamoto faced bringing Mario to 3D was the fact that by ditching 2D Mario and making a 3D Mario game the face of their new shiny toy, they were taking a huge risk. I mean, Mario at this time was a franchise that was known for its 2D platformers. Everyone loved them. Now imagine making the next big entry in the series a 3D game, and that throws everyone off from the Mario series.
Oh, brother!
It could kind of make them lose hope in Mario.
Oh, no!
As I previously mentioned, 3D games were really uncharted territory by this time, so this could either go one of two ways. It could be massively successful and introduce the world to a novelty in terms of game design, or it could be Bubsy 3D! If you like this game, I will fight you to the grave. A third big problem with this game was the fact that the N64 controller was snickerdoodle batshit crazy! Okay, I guess at the time the controller wasn't the worst thing in the world, but if you have only one joystick, you gotta be a goddamn genius to figure out camera control in a 3D space. But if Miyamoto ain't a genius, then the Switch ain't the best-selling Nintendo console. Goddamn you, DS! Super Mario 64's development lasted nearly 3 years, starting in 1993 and concluding in 1996. So, the first thing they did to tackle the problem of not knowing how a 3D Mario should play was that they focused on just making Mario himself feel perfect to control in an empty room. And this was genius because anyone who knows a goddamn thing about platformers will tell you that along with the level design, one of the most important things to nail is the feel of the actual platforming. I feel like movement is a big part of why games like Mario and Donkey Kong work so well. You want to land that ground pound, wall jump, hat throw, and dive combo in Mario Odyssey? Well, if it feels like a bother to pull off, you're not gonna bother. And Team Nintendo realized this early on. They knew that movement would be essential in the transition from 2D to 3D, and that players should be able to quickly learn the controls almost immediately after picking up this ugly thing, yet still enjoy it. It's possible, I promise. Before even designing levels, they made sure Mario felt very precise to control. This little guy could tiptoe, walk, or sprint depending on how far you push the controller, giving you a little bit more nuance in terms of the controls. And to complement this precise new moveset for Mario, they had to develop a camera system to keep Mario at the center of the screen and not break the damn game. Oh, that's a challenge. It's just problem after problem. I mean, look, prior Mario games were simple side-scrollers that existed in one plane. You move left, you move right, you jump. Now put that boy in 3D. Oh boy. You could go anywhere, and if you want to go anywhere, you gotta see anywhere. There were a lot of things that could go wrong here, but after months of deliberating, the team decided to opt for what I like to call Locky 2. Ludicrous, atrocious, kinesis-imbued tripod for underperformance. I swear I came up with that in like less than a minute. Okay, I'll be kind on Mario 64's camera control system. Although it does kind of suck on a monkey's balls in retrospect. Back then, it was virtually the first time any 3D platformer had attempted to implement any sort of independent camera control at all. Other platformers from that generation, like the PS1's Crash Bandicoot, used fixed camera angles, and with the N64's doohickey having only one analog stick, they didn't really have much to work with here. So, instead of an invisible camera system, Nintendo added Locky 2. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, but fuck this little guy. He was the cameraman. They made him an in-game character. This was actually a pretty clever way to make the camera feel more natural while simultaneously letting us know about the camera system's limitations. Players could adjust the camera using the N64 controller's C buttons. Left or right C would rotate the camera in increments, up C would switch to first person mode, down C would zoom out for a wider view. Sure, there wasn't any full 360-degree analog camera control, meaning the players had to work around preset angles that also automatically kind of adjusted based on Mario's movements. It was pretty cumbersome and players could get the camera stuck in pretty awkward angles, especially near walls, but you gotta take into account that they were pioneering new technology here and didn't have a second analog stick to work with. Goddamn, they were creating a blueprint. You know, I find it funny in hindsight that they opted to go out guns blazing and come out with a fully open level design 3D game when they probably could have gone with a more limited and linear but still 3D isometric fixed camera design, like 3D World and 3D Land. But this was the first time anyone was doing this with platformers, so I guess maybe they didn't know what would work best for the limitations of the N64. Would you look at Life, the guy who's never developed a game for a single day in his life, telling Nintendo how they should have developed their most revolutionary game for their console. Well, would you look at that? Nintendo apparently did consider going with a fixed isometric level design, similar to Super Mario RPG on the SNES. Not the SNES, you fucking pea-brain! But hey, if you're fucking with Miyamoto, you're fucking with the best, so you never do it like the rest. Goddamn, that rhymed! But anyway, I do think it was great that they opted to go fully 3D with the camera on this one, because honestly, it made the game really feel that much more revolutionary. I personally played Super Mario 64 for the first time in 2021, and I was impressed that Nintendo's first attempt at doing this 3D platformer thingy had held up so well. I mean, I never actually played Mario 64 growing up. Oh no, I'm much too young for that. I grew up on Metroid Prime Pinball? Can you tell why I'm like this? Like, what do you mean I have to avoid Goombas because it's much harder to jump on them now that I have fully three-dimensional control, so it makes judging my jumps harder? I love it, mama. Nintendo knew they had a masterpiece on their hands with this one. The game went through a lot of trial and error, but by the time the game was done, it all came together wonderfully. And the biggest thing Nintendo realized was that if simply moving Mario in a 3D space is fun in itself, the game will work. And it didn't just work, it set the standard for 3D games for the entire industry when it came to designing movement, camera control, and levels in a 3D space. Super Mario 64 was the blueprint, baby, and Super Mario Sunshine was the goddamn fuck this game. Mario 64 felt like nothing people had ever played before, and one of the reasons for this, which I haven't really touched on so far, were the visuals of the game. I wasn't around to witness the incredible jump from 2D to 3D gaming because I wasn't alive, but I can only imagine how insane this game looked at the time. Mr. Miyamoto specifically wanted to make the characters as expressive and detailed as possible to emulate that Saturday morning cartoon feel, and for their first 3D outing, I'd say they did a great job with this. Look at Mario's face. Okay, maybe that's a bit too expressive. It's also pretty interesting to me that even though this was peak graphics at the time, it was still extremely cartoony and stylized, whereas today, the most graphically intensive games, way more hyper-realistic than Mario would be. But hey, these are just the inconsequential ramblings of a man who severely starved for a new 3D Mario game, so if you take me too seriously, well, you might as well go play fucking Gex. You know, it is kind of funny looking back at Super Mario 64. There's so much that was changed from what Mario traditionally was at the time. changing the game design from 2D to 3D, making these open, explorable levels, making the game more complex than it already was. I mean, taking away the level timer, it almost doesn't even make sense that it still managed to connect with the same audience. I mean, look what happened to Donkey Kong. We don't talk about DK64. Now, I don't mean to exaggerate or sound corny here, two things I end up inadvertently doing in all my videos anyway, but Super Mario 64 was more than just a game. It was a revolution, and this is coming from someone who didn't even grow up with the game. So you know I don't have those damn nostalgia goggles on. Almost every influential 3D game from the 5th generation of gaming took cues from Mario 64, and heck, even beyond that. Even though it's not the best 3D Mario available right now, far from it, I can't deny its greatness or influence. And even though it was a massive risk for the company's greatest franchise being so different and off the wall, Nintendo believed in Miyamoto's vision and took an amazing risk with this game. In fact, they were so happy with the game that they felt confident enough to release their Nintendo 64 with only 2 games. The amply named Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wings. Come on, they knew nobody was fucking buying this thing because of Pilot Wings. Like, could you imagine a world where Super Mario 64 failed? Do you fucking take drugs?
Dale, mariachi!